everyone. We're a bit late, but I'll try not to hold you too much. So I'll jump real quick through the slides. My presentation is somewhat more general and less about DevOps. It's more about project management. And it's about scaling agile, which is really popular these days. At least half of my feed in LinkedIn is about that. Everyone getting certifications for implementing SAFe and things like that. But it's actually nothing new. And so we make apps for Jira, project management apps that allow you to manage multiple projects, complex projects. And for us, scaling agile started quite a few years back. And it's a natural thing because agile is not new, and all the teams, at least in software, are trying to be agile, and it's been like that for a while. And all these teams, when they're working together, naturally they need some way to work together on one big project, and they need to find a way to do that. So there needs to be some alignment between these teams. Another challenge they've been facing for many years is that when teams are agile, their managers are not always agile. And often you see the problem when there is micromanagement happening, your managers send you Microsoft project plan, and then you should be agile implementing it. So all these things, they're not new, they've been around for a long time, and we saw many of our customers struggle with that, and we try to help them with our tools a little bit. The good news, at least for the team, so we saw more like the grassroots agile implementation, scaling agile, starting from the team level, maybe program level. I'll be honest, we haven't worked too many times with executive level people, but I'm not sure if here there are any. The good news though is that this topic became so popular that so many methodologies appeared around it, and it became way easier to do it, and now there are actually some examples that you can show to your managers, and they can show to their managers, that actually explain how to do scaling agile, what benefits it gives. And so why people want to scale agile? So the first things I mentioned, of course, on the lower level, teams want to work together in a better way, and they want to be aligned with the management. So this is like the perspective from the bottom. But for the company, it's actually these days also becoming more and more important to be more agile on a company level, even if it's a large enterprise. It's important to deliver things faster, see how things work, to pivot if necessary, if market changes. So basically all scaling agile methodologies and approaches, they all try to provide similar benefits. So faster time to market, better quality, better alignment between all layers. If it's a large organization, it can be thousands of people working together. And in general, it makes people happy because they don't have to deliver the product at the end of the month after 2 years working on it. Nothing works. No one takes any vacations or days off. And all the approaches also have the basic similar concepts underneath. It's value-driven development, so you think about the value that whatever you do delivers, not about just some high-level planning that is not attached to anything. You try to have multiple teams working together. Teams are usually cross-functional these days, and this is the typical organization. They all involve like thinking in broader terms, trying to understand how all the parts of the solution that you're building work together, and they all have some space for innovation, and they try to embed this innovation part into your process. So we saw a few examples of large companies trying to implement it, and we were lucky enough to see them, like not just our part, but also they shared some ideas and some thoughts and feedback of how they were doing it, and these were some big companies, like some automotive, banks. So I wanted to share a few things that we found through these processes, some best practices, some tips and tricks. Maybe they will be useful for you too. So what we saw a lot of people would do, they would just jump into some methodology and say, yeah, we should do it, we should implement, we should be agile, company-wide. But they sometimes forget to start, like lay the foundation for it. And it's really important, and there are a few pretty simple questions that every company needs to answer before trying to implement it. They need to analyze where they are already with Agile, whether their teams are Agile or not, what they need to do to get to the next level, or maybe they don't have to be Agile. Some teams are not Agile, and that's also fine. But then you need to figure out how these teams should communicate with other teams. It's important to understand whether you can scale from the bottom or from the top. Should you, like, is your top management, for example, do you have the buy-in from them? Are they willing to start the organization-wide transformation? or it's going to be step by step from the bottom, maybe going each level up gradually. And there are ways to do it in many different ways. Sometimes it's from both ends. And based on all this information that you gather, you can try to figure out how to do it. And as I've mentioned, since the topic is so popular, there are actually a number of things that can help you with this process. So there's a bunch of methodologies that were developed. Again, they're not new, but these days they're really super popular. I'm sure everyone here heard about SAFe, Scaling Agile Framework. When I first saw it, I thought it's just another bunch of people who decided to write a few books and offer some trainings and make some money. But actually, it has its merit. It's a really thorough explanation of how you can implement Agile at a large scale. It's way more enterprise than Agile, as you can see from the picture, and many people make jokes about it. It has all these levels, all these roles. The cool part about it is that they actually thought through all the processes that you need to go through as you develop something as complex as this. They can actually offer like subsets of this, so you can have only a couple of levels, or maybe 3, or maybe 4 if it's a really large enterprise level implementation. I won't go into too many details as we don't have that much time, but the point here that we saw is that don't try to just embrace it and implement it as it's written there, although sometimes Scaled Agile organization pushes for that. But they offer a number of great practices, and it's really worth studying it and checking it out and seeing some recommendations that they offer, because once they rolled out this framework, they continuously update it based on the feedback that they get from the companies that try to implement it, and these are pretty large companies. And they introduce some new concepts, new practices, new roles, so it's worth to use it as just, at least as a book of knowledge on project management, and incorporate whatever can be applied to you. A lot of people criticize it for being too top-down, but then again, if it's a large enterprise, I haven't seen too many examples of anyone implementing, for example, less, which is way more agile. It's basically a collection of best practices and recommendations, plus some roles descriptions that help you scale agile. But again, it's way less prescriptive, but in a large company, you have to have very motivated, very organized, very disciplined team that will follow all the practices without, external pressure. And I don't know, maybe in companies up to 200, a few hundreds people, this could work. But in our experience, we haven't seen too many people implement it across maybe thousands of people. While SAFe has been successful, and we have quite a few customers who are pretty deep into implementation, and they're already seeing some results. So again, from any methodology that there is also discipline agile delivery. There is Spotify approach, which I think Christian mentioned earlier. The funny thing about Spotify themselves, they sort of did a few presentations on this approach that they came up with, but they have already moved forward. They keep changing it continuously. They keep adjusting the way they do things. So again, the important lesson from them is to not to just stick to one particular process that okay, I saw a cool presentation, let's do the same. All companies are different, and all companies do things slightly differently. Okay, so if we talk about tooling, I suppose most people here use Atlassian tools. It was more about DevOps this time, but I will talk about leveraging Jira and other Atlassian tools to actually implement SAFe. So since we make apps for Jira, naturally all our users use Jira software. It offers you quite a lot out of the box, as it is. It's a really nice platform for setting things up and laying your foundation. It also, just because it's so flexible, you can configure your own workflows, issue types, all kinds of verifications when you do transitions. So it's really nice to define basically the types of items you're going to work with and things like that. Plus, it offers you really nice functionality for teams. So for teams, depending on how they work, they have Scrum boards, Kanban boards. So you have all that in Jira. And for each individual layer, you kind of have quite a bit of functionality that can support it. So for the products, you have something. For the team, you have something. But once you go higher, And yeah, you can use also Confluence to manage your requirements, and you can connect your requirements in Confluence with tickets in Jira that implement them, so it's all there. But once you try to manage multiple teams together, Jira doesn't really offer much as it is. You can figure out something, create some reports, but it's not really going to work at a large scale or going to be very uncomfortable. But as probably most of you know, there are many apps that can help you do whatever with Jira. You can basically use it as a kind of the platform, and then you build the solution on top of that. And again, I just want to briefly mention some of the available apps. So obviously there is Portfolio for Jira, which is provided by Atlassian, one of the most popular apps. It had quite a sort of shift in its concept recently, and the new version is more about agile road mapping than it used to be before, but more about planning. It's really nice, and it offers you some good features for building the plans and tracking them as well across multiple teams. It has some limitations though. For example, the hierarchy that you define is for the entire instance. So you can't have some teams work with one sort of setup and the other one with the other. So everyone has to be uniform. There is Big Picture, another really popular app that also, it was actually designed with a safe approach in mind. And if it works, their solution works for your processes. It's really nice. There is our tools, Structure, Structure.Gantt, and a few others. And I'll talk about them in a bit. You'll see why they're different and how. And with all these three things, we see people do scaling agile processes with Jira, with different levels of success, which depend on a number of different things. And the important thing with the tools is that we often see people buy the tools and never use them, just because they didn't have time enough in the beginning to verify if the tool actually does what they want. Because in the description, if you read the description, they all do pretty much the same thing, or something very similar. So the important lesson here is to actually spend some time doing a few pilot projects. Like, it's really hard to figure out if it's going to fly in just 1 week. So we always encourage our users to evaluate at least a month or two and see if they can actually implement it for a couple of teams and see if it works, or maybe they will go somewhere else, because like selling them something they don't need is not cool. Okay, and the last thing here, Jira Align. I don't know if people here have heard about it. It's basically a new offering by Atlassian. They've just recently purchased a company called Agile Craft. Maybe some of you heard about that one. This is actually a whole different animal. So these three, they're, like I said, grassroots scaling agile. Basically, you have Jira, you have teams. They already try to be agile. These tools help them work together and help them to communicate with managers. Jira Align was designed from scratch with the whole idea of scaling agile in mind. So it's a very comprehensive tool that covers all the aspects, all the levels, all the roles. It has all the correct reporting that you need, and it can be used for different methodologies, for safe, for less, for any combination of those. It's pretty configurable. The only caveat is maybe the price. It's not cheap. It's also in the cloud only. But that's definitely an interesting offering. Atlassian is still figuring out how it's going to work with Jira. It has integration with Jira, of course. So we'll see what happens. But if you are in a really large organization, that might be a nice tool, because it's so well thought through, and basically they took each aspect of any framework and figured out how to represent it in the tool. All right, so a little bit about our own tools. So what do we offer in particular? Our tools actually started from a very simple thing. There was one of the top voted feature requests in Jira, and it was subtasks of subtasks. People wanted that for some reason. No explanation. It was more than 9 years ago. It turned out that this concept of hierarchies is essential for running any large project, at least in Jira. And that's what we did. We implemented the tool that allows you to build hierarchies and then show something. So this is our Jira. And imagine you have multiple teams working together, and we want to visualize all that scope. So our tool allows you to define some rules based on which your hierarchies will be created. And as you can see here, we are defining a rule that pulls in the initial scope. We can sort it by rank, because we are using probably Jira software and Jira boards to prioritize things. Then we pull in some of the issues that are linked to our initial scope. So we see some of our maybe program level issues, some features represented by epics. We can see the stories in these epics. And all these issues are coming from different projects, so there is no limitation in that. Basically, you can visualize any relations that exist in Jira and then show them all together in one nice view. And then you can show all kinds of data for this representation that you've built. So you can do aggregations of any numeric values. You can calculate progress. You can build some custom metrics using Excel-like formula language that we have and have some nice visual indicators. And it's all also editable inline, so you can click any field and adjust it right here. So again, the tool is not prescriptive. It's not built for a particular methodology in mind, but instead it can help you just visualize whatever you have in Jira. And if you have thousands of issues, that's a really nice way. So when it comes to implementing SAFe, there are a bunch of different situations where it's useful. First of all, building this full, complete hierarchy is essential, because otherwise in Jira you cannot see all this information. Like if you're looking at the high-level initiative, there's no way in Jira to see how much time you've spent, how much time you've planned, how much did it cost you. Well, with this hierarchy, you can easily pull that all information in. And once you build these hierarchies, you can put them on dashboards, on Confluence pages, and do things like that. You can also group things by any Jira fields as well, so you can see how much work you've planned for any iteration or some particular people. You can drag and drop between these groups, and that will update Jira fields in the background or the links, so it's all very interactive. It also can help you create certain context for individual teams, for example. So, for example, if you are a product manager or program manager and you're interested in the features you're going to deliver in the upcoming iteration, you can start by pulling in this initial scope you're interested in, and then you can pull in whatever linked to it, what interests you, and get some insight into that. And again, you can utilize these formulas and aggregation features to get all the calculations done. For example, it's also, like, just from the visual point of view, it's really helpful for some procedures that you have in SAFe, for example, PI planning. I don't know if you've heard about it. The idea sounds crazy, but companies claim it actually works. Basically, they have the concept of these longer iterations, which last a few months, and they would bring all the teams in one room for the planning session. They would have a huge whiteboard, and they would be sticking sticky notes on it with tasks that the team should be working on, and would create, they would put the strings to identify the dependencies, and then they would somehow move it all over to Jira or some other system. And Structure can be a good help for that, because you can just pull in all the tickets you're planning for the iteration and quickly click through them as you need to see the issue details, maybe modify things really quick. Plus you can, if you're using Confluence, you can use it for requirements, of course, but you can also utilize it in some creative ways. You can put, for example, the page for iteration feedback right inside this hierarchy. Then it's easier for everyone who works with it to quickly find the page and add things as they go, instead of collecting feedback at the end. So again, there are no hard rules. Depending on how your teams, how your company functions, you can come up with different ways to use it. You can also use it to quickly identify dependencies. So I can pull in, for example, a bunch of stories my team is working on, and then show everything that is linked to these stories coming from other teams. So here you can see a few that appeared. So it means I need to go and talk to these guys as we plan and make sure that we don't have any dependencies and we're doing it in the right order. And to take this even further, so we were talking to our customers, and surprisingly, the top voted feature they wanted were Gantt charts. People tend not to like Gantt charts these days because they're counter-agile, sort of. But in fact, it turned out that you can use them in many creative ways too, and they can really help you manage large projects, because you can do some high-level planning, not necessarily micromanaging. Gantt charts help you manage your resources, they help you track dependencies, they help you track deliverables. So a whole bunch of use cases, and so we try to address all those use cases with our tool. And this is what you can do. So basically you can create your hierarchy with the scope of work and use the Gantt charts to see on the timeline where it is. So like I said, you can do just some high-level planning, you can track deliverables, and Gantt chart will change as your work progresses. At least you can set it up that way, so if something gets delayed or your scope changes, things shift, you can quickly identify there is a problem and try to address it before it's too late. So it's like a tracking tool for the high-level stuff. Well, like I said, you can manage dependencies. For example, here you can see we actually have a number of sprints, and the story is scheduled for the sprints, and we can identify some dependencies between two different teams. So again, really nice visual way to help you identify problems and solve them through the Gantt chart, even though it's more like agile planning session with sprints and everything. And it, of course, can also help you manage resources. So again, it's a natural Gantt chart functionality, which does not exist in Jira otherwise. So we thought how we can push this even further for larger companies, for many teams working together, and we came up with an idea that very few teams use their past data to understand anything about future. And what we try to implement is the tool that helps you figure out when potentially you're going to be done based on your past team's performance. So basically we analyze the work of teams before, we build team profiles, and then map the scope of work that is defined and also that is not yet defined to these teams, and then present it in a nice cumulative flow diagram. So basically you can see here some past performance, done, in progress, and to do. And then here's a huge spike. So what we do, we try to take into account the fact that when you're planning in slightly larger iterations, you normally, for example, if you're using epics and stories, you don't break down epics into stories until you actually get to implementing the stories. So the teams don't do that. So you may see a bunch of epics assigned to a team, but no stories. So the scope is not there yet. Then again, we try to use the team profiles that we built to predict the scope that's not there yet and take it into account. And then using this chart, you can see that some teams are probably missing the deadline. Of course, it's just a predictive model. By no means this tells you, okay, this is your future. What it tells you that, okay, this team potentially may be late. Maybe it makes sense to go and talk to them. And this team is already done their work, so maybe we can take someone from that team and pull it into the team that potentially is late. So it's like a negotiation tool for you to work with your teams and figure out how you can make them more efficient and how you can make sure that they actually deliver on time. So it's still in sort of pilot. If it resonates with any of you, talk to us. We are over there, and we'll be happy to help you enable it and give it a try, and maybe collect some feedback from you. Yeah, everything I've shown, most of it is available for server and data center. We are working on the cloud version. It's already released, but there's no feature parity yet. I guess most people are on server and data center anyway, but if anyone is interested. So to go back a little bit to what we started with and a bit away from our tools, so a few concepts that we learned that are important to keep in mind. Start with understanding where you are if you're doing some agile transformation or planning. Don't try to implement anything by the book, because again, all the teams are different and you always have to take that into account. So yeah, just choose the ones that make sense for you. Do a few pilots, ideally. Don't do company-wide transformation without trying it first on a few teams. The same with the tools. Make sure you try them before. For most methodologies, again, since the topic is so hot, there are so many people that can help you. Some of them are not so good, some of them are great. You can get some consultants in project management area who will be able to at least help you get started. Although we've seen different kind of mindsets in the US, for example, in Europe. Trainings seem to help really well, so it's time-consuming and resources-consuming, but it can really help you get everyone on board. It's important to have someone who will be doing it and supporting it, because it's not just introduce the process and it works. It still requires refinements and adjustments. Some of the strange things that you may think are weird, they actually work, like these PI planning sessions, where some companies like Daimler, for example, they are flying the whole team from the US to Germany, and they claim it helps. And measure results. This is difficult, but if you can, it's good. This is all I had. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer later. And it's time for the snacks. Thanks, everyone.